So today's topic is hardware subscription. It's the latest trend, but is it right for your business? So here's the agenda for today. It's like Brian said, it's going to be a brief presentation. Agenda: hardware as a service, HAAS. What's this all about? IT world is synonymous with acronyms, so that's what my little plug there was. What's included with the hardware as a service subscription service is what we call it, and what are the pros and cons? Okay. So hardware as a service, we like to call it hardware subscription. And what does it really mean? So hardware as a service is really a procurement model. It does have a lot to do with your finance department, your accounting department. And it's similar to leasing or renting, in which hardware that belongs to a managed service provider like yourselves, DMS iTech, is installed at the customer's premise or within their data center or somewhere else, like the DMS iTech data center hosting location. And they usually have a service level agreement attached to the hardware subscription, and that's the responsibility of both parties with respect to this, is what is and what is not part of that agreement. And as I mentioned just briefly a minute ago here, a portion of the decision of going to a hardware subscription model is related to what the company's preferences is to the expense model. It's either a CapEx or an OpEx. With a CapEx, it's a capital expenditure. You're actually procuring the hardware and you're purchasing outright. With an OpEx, it's an operating expense, so it's a monthly expenditure. And they both have pros and cons. I'm not one to tell you what is best for your business. It's really, like I mentioned earlier, it is a business decision as to what the benefits and what the drawbacks are of each, the OpEx and the CapEx. And to put it into context, we have several customers with in-house IT resources, but their focus is on other areas of the business, like ERP implementations, company mergers, or they simply just don't have the internal expertise. So one of the benefits of a hardware subscription model is that you can free up these resources in order to put their focus elsewhere, and have somebody like ourselves provide the hardware with the additional benefits that come with it that we'll cover in a minute. So we call it hardware as a service, and either way, if the hardware breaks down or becomes outdated, which is usually based on a 3-year refresh rate, your managed service provider is responsible for replacing the failed components or decommissioning the hardware altogether. The hardware subscription model can be a very cost-effective way of businesses to provide their employees with state-of-the-art hardware in a cost-effective manner. The model is to be contrasted with the infrastructure as a service and managed hosting models, which are pay-as-you-go model, very much like the Azure, the Amazon cloud, and those things, where you basically acquire resources, IT resources, for a period of time. They can be done over a longer period of time, but usually that's not the most cost-effective means of doing it. Usually those can be more cost-effective in shorter terms. You need to spin up some servers, or you need some workstations for a short period of time. That can be very cost-effective. But hardware as a service is not. That is not what this is. And depending on the terms of the contract, now I mentioned contract a couple of times, and really what I'm getting at is the details of the contracts really needs to suit your business. And that's one of the things I want you to get out of this webinar today, is that it needs to suit your business in the best way for both parties. Both the provider and the customer obviously need to be happy on both ends. So depending on the terms of the contract, the decommissioning of the hardware may also include wiping of the proprietary data, physically destroying the hard drives, and certifying that the old equipment has been recycled legally. This is, of course, making sure that all the hardware that is being replaced, that all the data and digital assets on that hardware have been removed, backed up, and that the new data and the new hardware is functioning properly, and the data and everything else on that is working as you see fit. So to ensure there's zero margin of error, DMS iTech, we do destroy hard drives that were in servers, laptops, PCs, workstations, and so on. And then also we do recycle the hardware through the ERA, this is the Edmonton Recycling Association. And so if you're environmentally conscious, which most people should be, or all people should be, that's definitely a good way of recycling the components and the actual hardware itself. So what all is included in this hardware subscription? So it really depends on your managed service provider and obviously what their expertise and capabilities are. Not all managed service providers are experts in, say, Wi-Fi or firewalls or servers or IP telephony or whatever it may be, but it really is up to them what their expertise are, and ensure that they do have the expertise in those areas before you subscribe to them. So the hardware subscription model can provide your organization technology assets such as network appliances, so firewalls, routers, VPN appliances, network switches, and I put in there with or without PoE, and PoE stands for Power over Ethernet. And when you put in network switches, specifically in the core and some of the peripherals, it's sometimes important that you have the Power over Ethernet. Really what that's about is it powers, say, things like Wi-Fi access points or your telephones and IP telephony type environments and some other things. So the other items that can be done with the hardware subscription is servers, wireless access points, workstations, laptops, thin clients, monitors. We do IP telephony and the mobile data capture devices as well. And in conjunction, we also do the label printers as well. So in conjunction to the available hardware that your managed service provider can offer, the hardware usually will, or with our offerings, does include regular hardware maintenance and patching. So this means that there will be usually be a hardware maintenance schedule attached to the hardware. That's to apply manufacturer updates like firmware patches, hot fixes, any specifically related to the hardware. And hardware refreshes, usually every 18 to 36 months, depending on the service level agreement you have in place with your service provider and your organizations to renew this technology. The hardware refresh model is usually, like I mentioned before, goes between 18 to 36 months. And this makes planning, if you have these refreshes planned ahead of time, planning, staging, and implementing, executing these refreshes so much easier for both users and the managed service provider. From our experience, more power users like engineering and those type of computing environment requirements are usually refreshed every 18 months. And this is primarily due to the renewals of the hardware, the software that the engineering type, the CAD, the CAM, those type of applications require more hardware specs, primarily RAM, CPU, and video cards. On the contrasting side, the 36-month refreshes are usually done for administrative type people, shop users, sales, lower computing requirements. So manufacturer software and services subscription renewals, which devices like network security appliances and Wi-Fi access points, there's usually a software and support subscription attached to the hardware itself. And depending on what level of security appliance or access point, and when I say level, really how robust this item is, these software and services subscription renewals can cost anywhere between $400 to $2,000 a year. So there's definitely value there. And hardware monitoring is usually part of the security appliances and server platforms as well. And this provides managed service providers like ourselves a way of proactively isolating and resolving issues with hardware or other things as well proactively before things escalate. So there's definitely some value there. So what are the pros and cons of the hardware as a service model or hardware subscription model? So The benefits include hardware consistency. And please don't underestimate the importance of hardware consistency. And when I say this, hardware consistency, with that, you get significantly reduced overheads with respect to user familiarity. So when you implement new hardware, if it's all like, and say a user needs to go from one area of the facility to another, and it's all the same, that's very familiar to them, so they understand how everything works. If it's a new piece of hardware all over the place, then they may get confused, they may feel anxious, nervous, whatever it may be. So that definitely is a soft cost that you need to consider, as well as administrative overheads for provisioning and deploying, maintaining the hardware. And not even all those, as well as to mention that the benefits of buying in quantity, which reduces overall costs, and that should be passed on to the customer, which is what we do. So if we get a large order, obviously the cost of initial ownership is lower, and then we pass on those costs, the cost reductions to the consumer. One of the other benefits is the cost. So the hardware subscription model incurs a significantly reduced upfront capital expenditure, which allows the business to shift allocations from CapEx to OpEx, and it frees up your cash flow. IT asset obsolescence and lifecycle management. As I mentioned in the hardware consistency above, having the ability to properly plan and execute hardware lifecycle refreshes can significantly reduce cost. And this is on both sides of the fence, both on the customer and on the managed service provider side. And it also provides the user an up-to-date hardware that they require to stay current with continuous software updates and hardware specifications for applications, like I mentioned earlier, like the engineering example I provided. There's built-in hardware replacement, patching, maintenance, and updates. With most hardware subscription models, and I'll speak to ours here, you get hardware warranties, manufacturer-provided patching, like firmware and security updates. Now, when I say firmware and security updates, I am not talking about operating system updates, like the Windows patching every second Tuesday of the month type thing. That's a different thing that that's a support and maintenance model. That's not part of the subscription model usually. It can obviously be rolled into the whole subscription service, but this is really what I'm talking about, is if there's a new firmware update or if there's a new security patch or something like that for the hardware specifically. It can free up internal resources, and this can be IT or other resources that may deal with hardware support and refreshes, or just getting your assets, tracking your assets and everything else. So it can have a very big impact on the resourcing. And with the subscription model, this is largely alleviated. It could also be based on having the internal expertise for things like security appliances, server switching. And with a managed service provider, you'll get a broader mix of expertise, which can also reduce in-house IT resources or other resources as well. Scalability, if you need to scale up or down, depending on your service agreement and how it's written, this can usually be done quite easily. So if you need to scale up, again, you have like hardware, you can scale up, you can provision those, you know what your monthly costs are, you can budget to it, so away you go. There's no surprises. And worry-free and peace of mind. So summarizing all the items I mentioned above, the model is really intended to provide you as the customer and as trying to run your business a worry-free and peace of mind solution. And if you wanted to look at a more consolidated management level, it's one throat to choke, really, if you want to look at it that way. So there are some cons. The cons of hardware subscription include contract terms. So if you do not like contract terms or being tied to them, then this may not be for you. You want to ensure that the contract, if you do go this model, is favorable to you and the way your business runs, and it needs to be favorable to both sides. And yes, you'll pay a small premium for all the added services and support you get with the worry-free and peace of mind environment. And really, what it boils down to is the above pros, do they outweigh the cons? And again, I'll say it again, it's really your business model and how you want to approach it. So, and the one thing we usually say to people, for customers that are on it, if it breaks, we'll replace it, and it is included in the subscription. And I think that really wraps it up for today.